I want you to imagine that one morning your financial life changes before your mind has time to catch up with it. Maybe an investment that you almost gave up on suddenly becomes worth more money than you expected. Maybe a small business or side project you started quietly begins producing more income than your job. Maybe you receive an inheritance. Maybe you sell a company. Maybe through some unlikely event you win a large amount of money. Most people think the hardest part is getting the money. That is not true. In my experience, the hardest part begins after the money arrives. That is when the real test starts, because money does not only change your balance sheet, it changes the system around you. It changes incentives. It changes relationships. It changes how people behave toward you. It changes how you behave toward yourself. And if you do not understand that, the money that looks like freedom can quickly become a trap. I have seen this pattern many times in different forms. People spend years wanting wealth, and then when wealth finally arrives, they treat it like an event instead of a system. They think, I am rich now. Therefore, the problem is solved. But becoming wealthy is not the same thing as staying wealthy. Those are two totally different skills. One skill is about accumulation. The other is about preservation, behavior, judgment, privacy, structure, and discipline. And most people who get rich quickly have not developed the second skill. They have a large new asset, but they still have the same old operating system that is dangerous. So if money suddenly comes into your life, the first principle is simple. Tell almost nobody. That may sound cold, it may sound unnecessary, it may even sound paranoid, but it is not paranoia. It is an understanding of incentives. The moment people know you have money, you stop being seen as only a person. You become a resource. You become a solution to other people. S problems, you become a target for other people. S hopes, resentments, schemes, expectations, and emergencies. You may think the people around you will be happy for you, some will be, but many will not know how to process it. Money reveals people. It does not merely change them. When a person suddenly becomes wealthy and announces it, the signal travels faster than they expect. Friends tell friends, relatives tell relatives, strangers appear. Old relationships wake up. People who ignored you for years suddenly remember your phone number. People with business ideas appear. People with sad stories appear. People with lawsuits, scams, investment pitches, and emotional pressure appear. And because you may still be emotionally excited, you are vulnerable at exactly the moment when you need to be most careful. That is why privacy is not a luxury. Privacy is risk control. There is a difference between being rich and looking rich. The people who keep wealth usually learn to become what I would call quietly wealthy. They do not need to display it. They do not need to win the argument. They do not need to prove that they made it. They understand that the more attention wealth attracts, the more friction it creates. A person who becomes loud with money usually becomes surrounded by claims on that money. There is an old story of a man who won a huge lottery prize. Hundreds of millions of dollars. He became public. He gave money generously. He helped people. He bought things for friends. He became known as the man with the money. At first, that looked noble. And generosity can be noble when it is governed by principles. But generosity without structure becomes chaos. The requests kept coming. The boundaries disappeared. The relationships warped. His family life deteriorated. People around him changed. Some were hurt, some used him, some resented him. In the end, the money that should have brought freedom brought disorder. That is not because money is bad. It is because money magnifies systems. If your system is weak, money makes the weakness bigger. So the first thing I would do is stop. I would say nothing publicly. I would not announce it online. I would not make visible lifestyle changes. I would not buy things that cause people to ask questions. I would not become the person who suddenly has signs. I would keep my life outwardly stable for a period of time, not forever, but long enough to think clearly. The second thing I would do is speak to the right professionals before speaking to almost anyone else. And the first person I would speak to would not be a friend. It would not be a cousin who knows a little about investing. It would not be a person selling something. It would be a good attorney who understands trusts, estate planning, asset protection, and privacy. This is not because you are trying to hide from your responsibilities. It is because large wealth needs structure. A person with little money can often operate with informal habits. A person with meaningful wealth cannot. The scale changes the consequences. If you have $1 million and you make a 10% mistake, that is $100,000. If you have $5 million and you make a 10% mistake, that is $500,000. If you do not understand taxes, trusts, claims, ownership, beneficiaries, lawsuits, and estate rules, the money can leak out through holes you did not even know existed. A trust can do several important things. It can create privacy. It can help transfer assets in a more orderly way. It can protect against certain kinds of chaos. It can help prevent your wealth from becoming an open invitation for conflict after you die. It can also force you to think in terms of rules instead of emotions. And rules are important because emotional money gets destroyed. When wealth arrives suddenly, the mind wants to act, it wants to celebrate, it wants to reward itself, it wants to relieve guilt, it wants to rescue everyone, it wants to prove something, it wants to repair the past. Those impulses are understandable, but they are not a strategy. A strategy begins by asking, what are the risks? What are the probabilities? What are the second-order consequences, and what principles will govern my actions when I am under pressure? If you do not write down your principles before pressure arrives, pressure will write them for you. The next principle is about work. Many people say that if you become rich suddenly, you should not quit your job. I understand why they say that. They are trying to protect you from boredom, identity loss, impulsive spending, and the psychological shock that comes when structure disappears from your life. But I would state it more precisely, if your job makes you miserable, you may leave that job. But do not leave purposeful work. Those are not the same thing. A job can be a bad fit, a boss can be toxic, a work environment can drain you. If money gives you the ability to leave a bad situation, that can be healthy. But if you stop working entirely and you have no mission, no responsibilities, no rhythm, and no reason to be useful, you put yourself in danger. Being rich and bored is one of the most underrated risks in life. When people have money and no structure, they often begin spending to create stimulation. They buy houses they do not need, they buy cars that make them visible, they fund businesses they do not understand, they invest in restaurants because they like eating at restaurants, they invest in startups because the founder is charming, they say yes to things because they are bored and want a story. That is not investing. That is entertainment disguised as investing. And entertainment can be very expensive, so if sudden wealth arrives, I would keep life normal for at least several months. I would not make irreversible decisions. I would not move too quickly. I would not tell myself I must immediately reinvent my entire life. The nervous system needs time to adapt to a new reality, keep a routine, keep waking up at a normal time, keep exercising. Keep reading, keep doing useful work. If you leave your job, replace it with something meaningful. Learn, build, serve, teach, volunteer, start carefully, explore slowly. But do not create a vacuum, because a vacuum will be filled, and often it is filled by consumption, bad ideas, bad people, and unnecessary risk. The next principle is about debt. If you suddenly become wealthy, you may be tempted to think debt no longer matters. That is a mistake. Debt is not just a number. Debt is a claim on your future. High-interest debt is a compounding machine working against you. Credit cards at 20 or 30% interest are not small problems. They are guaranteed negative returns. If you pay off a credit card charging 25%, you have effectively earned a 25% risk-free return by removing that drag from your system. That is very hard to beat in the real world. So I would clear high-interest debt quickly. Credit cards first. Personal loans next. High-interest car loans. If they are expensive, anything with a rate that creates a large negative compounding effect should be removed. But not all debt is the same. A low-rate mortgage at 2 or 3% is a different kind of obligation than a credit card at 28%. If you pay off cheap debt too quickly, you may be using capital that could have been more productive elsewhere. That does not mean you should keep debt automatically. It means you should think in terms of costs, alternatives, liquidity, taxes, and risk. The principle is not all debt is bad. The principle is understand the nature of the debt. Some debt is destructive, some debt is tolerable, some debt, used carefully, can be part of a productive system. But if you do not understand the difference, keep it simple and reduce the fragility in your life. The goal after sudden wealth is not to maximize every possible return immediately. The goal is to make sure you cannot be knocked out by old liabilities, bad habits, or emotional decisions. High-interest debt is a hole in the bucket. Fill it before you worry about fancy investments. Then comes one of the hardest parts, family and friends, when money arrives. The people closest to you may feel that your wealth has changed the contract between you. They may feel that because the money came quickly, it is not fully yours in the moral sense. They may believe you can help them without cost. They may think your refusal means you do not love them. This is where many people destroy both their wealth and their relationships. If you lend money to relatives and friends, you must understand what you are really doing. You are not just moving money, you are changing the relationship. A loan creates a hierarchy. The person who owes you money begins to feel pressure, shame, resentment, or avoidance. You begin to notice whether they spend money on other things while they still owe you. They begin to feel judged. Family gatherings change. Trust weakens. The fastest way to lose both money and people is to make informal loans to people you love. So I would create a rule in advance. If I help someone, it is a gift, not a loan. And if it is a gift, it must come from a predetermined giving bucket, not from the core wealth engine. It must also come with boundaries. You can say, I am willing to help once in this specific way. I do not expect repayment, but I cannot become your ongoing emergency fund. That sounds hard. It is actually kinder than the alternative. If you become the person who always rescues people, you train them to depend on you instead of developing their own strength. You also create a pattern where every crisis becomes your problem. Eventually, you will either say no and be resented or say yes until the money and the relationship are both damaged. Principled generosity is different from emotional leakage. Generosity should be designed, it should have rules, it should be sustainable. It should not threaten the system that protects your independence. If you want to help family, do it in ways that improve outcomes rather than simply relieve pressure. Pay for education directly, help with medical emergencies through the provider. Assist with a down payment if it fits your plan and the relationship is healthy. Create a family education fund, but do not hand out money because someone pressures you in a moment of emotion. Every dollar should have a job. Some dollars are for living, some are for investing, some are for liquidity, some are for giving, some are for fun. But when all dollars are treated as available, wealth becomes unstable. That brings me to the most important principle in sudden wealth. Do not spend the principal, spend only from the income, and even then, spend carefully. Most people who become rich fast look at the principal and think, this is my money to spend. That is how fortunes disappear. They buy the large house. Then the house needs maintenance, staff, taxes, insurance, repairs, furniture, upgrades, security, landscaping, and attention. They buy expensive cars. Then they need storage, insurance, depreciation, and replacement. They send children to schools they cannot sustain. They help relatives without limits. They upgrade every category of life at once. Soon the principle is no longer a base of freedom. It is fuel being burned. I think about wealth like a machine. The principle is the machine. The income is the output. If you consume the machine, the output stops. The purpose of wealth is not to buy everything your impulses want. The purpose of wealth is to buy freedom from having to do things you do not want to do. That freedom depends on preserving the machine. This is where the freedom figure becomes useful. Ask yourself a simple question. How much income do I need each year to live? Well, not extravagantly, but well. Then multiply that number by 25. If you need $200,000 a year, the simplified freedom figure is $5 million. That is based on the idea of a 4% withdrawal rate. It is not a law of nature. It is a planning tool. The future can be different. Markets can underperform. Inflation can surprise you. Taxes matter. Sequence of returns matters. Your behavior matters, but the rule gives you a starting point. If you have $5 million and you spend like you have $50 million, you are still fragile. If you have $5 million and you structure your life around preserving the principal, producing income, and limiting unnecessary claims, you have a much better chance of turning a one-time event into lasting independence. The person who looks rich may be consuming wealth. The person who stays rich is often quietly preserving productive assets. Now let us think about how the wealth can be invested. At the point of sudden wealth, the question changes. Before wealth, you may focus mostly on growth. After wealth, the bigger issue becomes balance between preservation, income, liquidity, inflation protection, and long-term compounding. You do not want all of the money in one asset. You do not want all of it in cash. You do not want all of it in speculative investments. You do not want all of it in a house. You do not want to become dependent on one outcome. Diversification is not about being fancy. It is about not letting one mistake or one environment destroy the whole system. One possible way to think about a large portfolio is to divide it into different roles. A portion can go into broad stock market exposure. A low-cost total stock market index fund gives you ownership in many companies. It is not guaranteed. It will go down sometimes. But over long periods, productive businesses tend to grow because people keep working, innovating, producing, and solving problems. Stocks are the growth engine, but growth engines are volatile. They can fall 20, 30, 40% or more. If you are forced to sell during that period because you need spending money, you may damage the portfolio permanently. So stocks should not be your only system. Another portion can go into high quality bonds or bond funds. Bonds are essentially loans to governments or companies. They generally provide income and stability, though they also have risks, especially when interest rates move. Bond funds can fall in value. Individual bonds have duration and credit risks, but as a category, high-quality bonds can reduce volatility and create a more stable stream of income. Bonds are not there to make you feel rich. They are there to keep the system from breaking when stocks are stressed. Then there is real estate. Residential real estate can provide appreciation, income, and inflation linkage if bought properly. Commercial real estate can provide cash flow, but it also carries risks. Tenants can leave, financing costs can rise, buildings can require capital, markets can change. Real estate is not passive in the way people imagine. Even with managers, you are still owning a physical system with problems. But real estate has one advantage that many financial assets do not have. It is tangible. It can produce rent. It can benefit from inflation over long periods if rents and values rise. It can also create tax advantages depending on the structure, depreciation, financing, and local rules. If you do real estate poorly, it becomes a second job and a source of stress. If you do it carefully with conservative assumptions, good management, and enough reserves, it can be a useful part of an income system. Then there are higher volatility assets like Bitcoin or Ethereum or other speculative assets. I would treat these differently from the core wealth machine. They may have large upside. They may also fall dramatically. The right question is not, can this go up a lot? The question is, if this went down 70%, would my life plan still work? If the answer is no, the position is too large. A small allocation to high volatility assets can be reasonable for some people if they understand the risks and do not confuse possibility with certainty. But sudden wealth is often destroyed by people who take concentrated bets because they believe the event that made them rich will repeat itself. That is a dangerous belief. One lucky or successful outcome does not prove that you have become immune to risk. It may only prove that one bet worked. A portion of the portfolio should also remain in liquid cash or cash equivalents, not because cash is a great long-term asset, inflation erodes it, but liquidity gives you time. It prevents forced selling, it lets you handle taxes, emergencies, opportunities, and life changes without disrupting the portfolio. Cash is not the engine, it is the shock absorber. A portfolio that has no liquidity may look optimized on a spreadsheet and fail in real life. So if a person had, for example, $5 million, one illustrative structure might include a broad stock market fund, a high-quality bond allocation, real estate exposure, a small high-volatility sleeve, and a large liquid reserve. The exact amounts depend on age, taxes, location, risk tolerance, obligations, family structure, and goals. I am not giving you personal financial advice. I am describing principles. The principle is that every asset should have a purpose: growth, stability, income, inflation protection, optionality, enjoyment. If you do not define the purpose, you will chase whatever sounds exciting that week, and excitement is usually the enemy of durable wealth. Now, there is another part that many people do not like to discuss. You should spend some money if sudden wealth arrives and you do everything right, but never allow yourself to enjoy any of it. Resentment can build. You can become so afraid of losing money that the wealth owns you instead of you owning it. That is not the goal either. The solution is to create a fun money bucket, a defined amount that you can spend without guilt and without threatening the principal. Maybe it is 5%, maybe it is 10%. It depends on the size of the wealth and your needs, but it should be explicit. If you want a trip, take the trip. If you want to help someone in a defined way, do it. If you want a reasonable upgrade to your life, allow it. The point is not to become a monk. The point is to avoid turning a celebration into a permanent burn rate. The biggest danger is not one purchase. It is lifestyle inflation becoming permanent. A car can be sold, a vacation ends. But a larger house, higher taxes, expensive maintenance, private school commitments, recurring support for relatives, staff clubs, and status expenses can lock you into a cost structure that the portfolio cannot safely support. Most people do not go broke from one day of irrational spending. They go broke because one day becomes a new identity. They begin to think, this is who I am now. That is the trap. You are not your spending level. You are not your house. You are not your car. You are not the opinions of people who want you to prove your wealth to them. Real wealth is the ability to choose. It is waking up and deciding how to spend your day. It is being able to say no. It is not needing to impress people. It is being able to care for your health, your family, your work, and your time without being dominated by money stress. That is why the quiet path is usually the stronger path. Keep the principal protected, build the income machine, create rules for giving, eliminate high-interest debt, get professional structure, stay private, keep purposeful work, diversify, maintain liquidity. Spend some money intentionally, but do not let spending become the system. And then think beyond yourself. Wealth that survives one generation usually has structure. Wealth that survives multiple generations has culture. If you want the money to help your family after you are gone, you cannot only leave assets, you must leave principles. You must teach how money works. You must explain why the principle is not to be consumed. You must explain why privacy matters. You must explain that relationships and money must be handled carefully. You must explain that wealth is a responsibility, not just a privilege. Otherwise, the next generation receives the capital but not the operating system. And capital without an operating system usually gets consumed. So if you become rich suddenly, do not treat that moment as the finish line. Treat it as the beginning of a new game with new rules. The old game was about getting money. The new game is about not letting money. People, taxes, debt, emotion, boredom, status, and bad decisions take it away from you. Most people fail because they believe the money itself will solve the problem. But money is only a tool. A tool in the hands of someone without principles can do damage. A tool in the hands of someone with principles can create freedom, stability, generosity, and legacy. So the sequence matters. Do not announce it. Get legal structure. Do not abandon purposeful work. Eliminate high-interest debt. Set rules with family and friends. Do not spend the principal. Know your freedom figure. Build a diversified income and growth system. Keep liquidity. Give intentionally. Enjoy some of it, but do not let enjoyment become a permanent leak. And remember the deeper truth: the event that makes you rich is not what determines whether you stay rich. Your principles determine that. Your habits determine that. Your ability to delay action until you understand the consequences determines that. Your ability to avoid attention determines that. Your ability to distinguish between wealth and consumption determines that. Because in the end, sudden wealth does not create character. It reveals the system you already have. If that system is weak, the money will expose it. If that system is strong, the money can become freedom. And that is what I would want you to understand before the money arrives, not after it is gone.